real current photograph that just knocked everybody off their feet was your Time magazine cover. Had some serious impact.
They found 4 mothers that were breastfeeding their children to come to, to a studio in New York, and this mother that ended up on the cover actually came from Los Angeles. She was a little bit petite. She's not a very tall woman, and the boy was huge, almost 4 years old. The kid was wearing these camouflage pants, that makes him appear even older. It's not so much about the picture that people got so excited, it's more about the content.
That's one of the extraordinary things about photography. That idea of breastfeeding in this world that we live in today has somehow become something pornographic.
I was completely dumbfounded too that people thought this was kind of sexual.
It's also the kid looking back at the camera.
Well, he's almost 4, so I would just say, Can you look at the camera, please?
Yeah.
I've had the rare opportunity to meet many amazing photographers who move through their different landscapes to create powerful images. I'm always inspired by how these images transform the way we see people and understand the world. A great photograph needs no explanation, but on Capture, these incredible people tell the story of creating their most memorable images. I'm Mark Seliger, and this is Capture.
Hi, I'm Mark Seliger, and we are in my studio, and I'm here with Matthew Modine and Martin Schoeller. One of the first pictures that I saw of Martin's that I just wished I had taken, because I'm friends with the subject, was Lyle Lovett. I remember reading about it, I think it was in the New Yorker, right? I'm following your career, don't you worry. I loved it because it was Lyle Lovett on this ranch in the middle of this field, and he's roped this calf because he's really into rodeo tricks. And he was wearing the most pristine Lyle Lovett Prada suit. Just exactly the way that you would imagine Lyle Lovett to be dressed, even if he was roping calves. It was a beautiful, funny, the perfect little wink of comedy in that. And I just thought, that's brilliant.
That was a typical magazine assignment, kind of complicated, a little bit of a nightmare. I was sent first to Salt Lake City to photograph him, and he also rides motorcycles. They have these salt lakes. So I found this this motocross bike that he likes to ride sometimes, and I had him in the suit, and we made the suit all dirty, and I have him flying through the air on this motorcycle.
Amazing.
In the salt lakes outside of Salt Lake City. I was very proud of myself. I come back to the New Yorker, and they're like, well, the motorcycle is not really mentioned in the article. And he's more about, country, and we feel like it would have to be more like a, country music theme. It was a little bit uncomfortable, and, I took some pictures. I wasn't excited about any of them. I went to my in-laws' house in Cleveland for Thanksgiving, and I'm sitting there, and I'm still not happy with my pictures, and I come up with this idea of having him tie up this calf. I call him up and say, and I flew back on my own dime, and we met on a farm of a friend of his and took the picture.
I've done that a couple of times too, throwing yourself into it enough to where you're sponsoring the great shoot.
I think that's the journey of an artist, is the simplicity. When we look at photographers that we really admire over the course of their lifetimes, is the reduction of things, that was the simplicity. Let me get it down to the most simple gesture. It's the object that you put on that white desert, the object that you put on that white piece of paper, the images that you put on a piece of photographic paper. That the less you have the possibility to create what it is you're going to put on that white piece of paper.
Well, you've worked with so many incredible directors and been in places that most of us would wish to just have a little window into. Do you make it a habit to always bring your camera in to kind of introduce that as a part of your life?
On Full Metal Jacket was that I had a luxury of time. The filming took place over the course of two years. I was getting ready to go do Full Metal Jacket, and I had a friend named Joe Kelly who said, Kubrick has this photography background. It might be great if you learned how to use this camera, show up on the set with it, and it might be a way to crack the ice with Stanley Kubrick.
Good trick.
Look at this, yeah. So I showed up on the set with my Rolleiflex and was kind of trying to, show Kubrick that I knew how to handle it. And he said, "What are you doing with that old piece of shit?" And he talked me into buying this Minolta. He said, if you want to take pictures on my set, and he encouraged me, which was really, really extraordinary, because he's so private. To be able to be given permission to take pictures on his set was extraordinary. There was just opportunity when Stanley Kubrick was photographing something that allowed me to be on that set in that moment to be able to capture something.
That's like the gift.
He told me to go out and buy this Minolta, and he told me every single lens that I should get, and I hated the Minolta. I hated everything about it.
But you had to use it because that was the camera that Stanley Kubrick told you had.
Yeah, the one that I kept on my body while I was working on the film was the Rolleiflex. I kept it tucked inside my flak jacket, and when there was an appropriate time, I would take it out and snap a picture.
Did you have a kind of a beginning where you were inspired by photography? Was there like, I mean, a Rolleiflex is kind of Diane Arbus, Avedani.
I didn't know the history of people who had used the Rolleiflex. I just knew I'm dyslexic, and there's something about the fact that you're looking down into something and everything's up kind of upside down and backward, that it was something that I suddenly saw the world the way that
you wanted to.
I could interpret it. Yeah.
Yeah, it made sense to you.
Yeah. I love it.
That's amazing. You said Jack Nicholson, right? That feels like such a iconic series for me and a lot of people. I mean, he seems like a wild character. I've never photographed him before.
Jack Nicholson invited us to come to his house, which, as you know, never happens. Obviously, just him sitting on his bed in his bedroom would be a picture, you know, considering it's his own bedroom. You don't need to really do anything. We got stuck in the guest house, which wasn't very exciting. I tried to set up things and make things out of something that are really not that interesting with lighting. I didn't have many concepts because, you know, I assumed he wouldn't do anything. And then after about 2 hours, he shows up and he's wearing this red clown's nose. And I'm like, interesting.
That's kind of awesome.
And his publicist is like, Jack, what are you doing? He's like, what? I haven't, what do you mean? He pretended he's not wearing anything and sat down, and he told me it was his idea with a loop, you know, this famous picture that his mouth like smiling. He says, that was my idea, so now we're doing the clown's nose. Long story short, it took me a long time to get rid of the nose to do my close-up picture. So I have all these pictures of him with this clown's nose, and it's funny for a minute, but I knew, you know, in the end, a portrait of him, just him as he is, an honest portrait would be better than one of him wearing a red nose.
In your landscapes, there's a very kind of haunting experience going on. This kind of reminded me of that great photograph of the family running through the Dust Bowl. This is kind of a nice atmosphere.
There's a film that I want to make about the American Civil War that's not really about the Civil War, it's about two boys. So I took that photograph as a marker for me of how I want my film to look. The extraordinary thing, I learned this from Carol Ballard, who made a movie called The Black Stallion. You know, you feel that you're on a remote beach in the middle of no place, but if I would have turned the camera just a little bit to the left, you would have seen the hotel that we were staying at. But you create this illusion with the camera of being someplace. I know that I can make a Civil War movie by focusing on certain places. I could film places in New York City, find angles of the Cooper Union where Abraham Lincoln made a speech over, you know, in the East Village, by putting it at a certain angle and recreating a moment. And this was encouraged by me as a filmmaker from Stanley Kubrick. You don't need all those trucks and all that equipment to make a film. What a film is using that motion picture camera and telling a story. The most important thing is the story. Then figuring out, where do I put the camera to tell that story? As you do when you're taking stills with your cameras. It's like, what is the story? How do I best capture this person's soul? What it is that I'm trying to illustrate with this photograph.
Well, and I think also about this landscape, which is different than, say, a portrait. Is there like an emotional experience for you in that photograph?
Yeah, there is, because that's what I'm trying to capture with this story about a boy who loves his uncle. And he discovers that his uncle isn't everything that he imagined, that the uncle is a deceitful, lying adult. You know, he loves his nephew. He's taught him how to shoot and ride horses and things like that. But what the boy starts to discover is that things aren't what they appear to be. It's like how we grow up loving a nation. We love America, we feel patriotic. And then we just start to discover things about our country that are kind of deceitful and horrible. The filmmaker David Lynch I think he said it beautifully. He said, I'm not saying that there's a conspiracy or that America's responsible, but when did it become unpatriotic to ask questions? We can't just have blind patriotism.
Your Bodybuilders series, the transformation goes from femininity to just going into this other alien world.
An assistant of mine was very interested in bodybuilding, and I always thought it was kind of a sport that didn't interest me at all, but I went with him to a competition and for the first time saw like bodybuilders standing in front of me, and I was like, wow, that's what a human body can look like. It was just mind-boggling. I didn't anticipate that people could never look behind this like mask of extreme physical expression. Everybody just said, oh my God, that's freaky, that's crazy. These women argue that they're born with the exact same muscles as men. You know, who's to say that just men look strong and women should look weak, you know, so I have a lot of sympathy for them. Obviously, bodybuilding is not a healthy sport, and everything that comes with it is oftentimes very sad, you know, the drugs and
the doping.
The doping.
It's good that you can provoke conversation like that too, though, in a weird way. It kind of takes it to all different places. It allows a response.
My grandmother said that life is like a spinning top, and she said that there's 3 sides to it. There's physical, spiritual, and mental. And that so long as you keep those things in balance, physical, spiritual, and mental, you'll spin on center like that toy. But if you start doing one thing too much, it starts to wobble and life becomes like the Hopi Indian word, that Koyaanisqatsi, it becomes life out of balance. When I see that kind of bodybuilding, I feel like it's a life out of balance, too much physical and not enough mental and spiritual work being done to stay on point.
This picture of Robert Altman, it's a great photograph. It shows a very troubled soul.
That picture of Robert Altman was taken during rehearsal for a play that I was doing. It was the last play that Arthur Miller had written called Resurrection Blues. None of us knew he'd had a heart transplant. He had a heart from a young girl. He was dying, and he knew it. It was on a very cold stage where we were rehearsing, so he was covered up. He had his hat on. He wore leather gloves inside the building. It was one of those cold English winters. I feel it's a very intimate photograph because he shared that with me. He shared what I feel was his fear, you know, the inevitability, you know, the consequence of life is death. We don't see the wall that we're all going to crash into, but, you know, eventually I guess there comes some moment where we realize that the end is near and we're going to smash into that wall.
When did he share that with you?
During rehearsals. This is only about 4 months, 5 months before he passed away.
Did you know that before you took that picture?
I knew that he wasn't well. I knew that he was just too frail.
Because that picture to me really says that there is fear there, but there's also like this trust.
I agree
so
with you.
He gave you a little preemptive window there, a little message.
You know, the extraordinary thing for this relationship that we had was that my career began with Robert Altman. I did a film called Streamers. It was an extraordinary lesson that he taught me as an actor, and as a, you know, that it applies to each of your work. He said, you see, kid, I'm not interested in how I would interpret the role. I hired you because I wanted you to interpret the role. That's why I cast you. And you did. You did a great job. If I was interested in my interpretation, I would have played Billy.
That picture looks like he's telling you that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the journey. That's an artist's journey, isn't it? Is to find out how to be. Yeah.
I love your Steve series. I love this Steve, and I loved your Stephen Colbert.
Both of them are great subjects. I photographed Steve Carell a couple of times. He's just a pleasure to work with. He's pretty much up for whatever, and he turns even like the most boring thing into something hilarious. He's got a great sense of humor. And so many comedians are very difficult to photograph because they're very different, and they're not really very funny in life. They're actually rather serious and a little bit more reserved. I said, Steve, I have this idea with tape. You know, I didn't tell him beforehand, obviously. And then just whipped out this roll of tape and went like, and he was like, are you sure this looks good? Do you think this looks good? I was like, it looks great. Sometimes you have to wait for the publicist to disappear to pull out your best ideas. Stephen Colbert was also a very fun subject. It was kind of a collaboration. I don't know who came up with what ideas, but I photographed him as a vampire. He was eating money, I think, at some point. We built a little set so he could look like Mount Rushmore with people climbing over his face. We had a bald eagle. He was walking a bald eagle on a leash. And it all ended with him in his suit, but his suit completely torn up, looking like a homeless man pushing this shopping cart full of books and a bunch of trash, and he's just pushing it down this like lonely highway.
Kind of a shocking sounding image, isn't it?
I think we have very similar sense of humor. Your pictures, sometimes I think like, I wish I had that idea. It happens to me all the time. So I think our pictures are sometimes very close.
Yeah.
Our aesthetic is not that different.
I think your portraits have a lot of you in them, kind of a kindness and an honesty and a revealing aspect to the way that people look at you in your portraits. People let their hair down a little bit with you in a way which you would normally see. Is that a reflection of yourself?
Yeah, I mean, people that I'm interested in photographing are people that I like. I only took 2 pictures of Giancarlo and only 1 picture of Lara Flynn Boyle. I was going to say because I'm cheap, but it's because I grew up without money. You know, I'm the youngest of 7 kids. My dad was a drive-in theater manager. It's just, I know that when I push the plunger, that's an expense, and that I know that I'm going to have to make a contact sheet, you know, develop the negative, and then make a print, you know, that all of that's money. So I don't usually push the plunger on the Rolleiflex unless it's a picture that I know that I'm going to like. There's something that happens with a Rolleiflex, the relationship between the subject and the camera, that I think is very special. That they know that that's a special camera. They know that there's been these really wonderful, amazing photographers who've used the Rolleiflex. And I think that they open themselves up to the camera.
I was hired by National Geographic magazine to photograph twins. I got so many comments on these photographs, photographing the twins in my close-up style, rather together, separate one by one, and then allowing this comparison, you know, because my pictures are so static and always the same angle, same lighting. For the first time, people felt like they could really compare the similarities of twins and see what they have in common, what they don't have in common. Now I'm doing a whole book called Identical, which will be portraits of twins, but also of multiples. I photographed some identical quadruplets. There's about 6 or 7 identical quadruplets in Northern America. They have a twins festival in Twinsburg, Ohio every year.
Was it on the 22nd of February?
No, it's the beginning of August. I'm going back there this year. It's a kind of a weird experience seeing twins all day. You feel like you're seeing double. It is slightly disorienting.
Left out.
You feel left out, yeah.
Guess what's next, Martin?
Tell me.
You tell me, Matthew.
I'm guessing that there's a fishbowl with some little pieces of paper in it, and this could be a moment when we reach into it and ask each other random, unspecific questions about our lives.
Sorry, Matthew. Why don't you can ask Martin a question. Let's just get him right in the hot seat.
I get to ask this to Martin.
Yeah.
This question is for you. What's the greatest change in photography in the last decade?
The possibility of documenting real life, that everybody's turning into photographers and photographing scenes around the world that normally don't get any news coverage. You know, that people are taking pictures in Iran with their phones on the street and show protests and are able to share them with the world. I think it's a very powerful tool that will hopefully in the future also keep us in touch with what's actually going on around the world, because the media coverage that we see on television is only one side of the story.
It's amazing reality, isn't it?
Yeah, and to be able to share that via the web, to be able to give a perspective that people, I mean, I remember the first time I went to Ireland, you know, and the perception here in America was that the whole country was under siege, you know, that the IRA was blowing things up and the whole country was on fire. And I landed in Dublin expecting to see this kind of violence and burning buildings, and they said, no, man. He said, it's probably less than 300-400 people, you know. But the way that gets magnified through the news is that the whole country's in turmoil and people are suffering and starving to death. That the potato famine is still going on, and in fact, it was just a pimple on an ass.
Well, thank you guys very much for coming by and visiting. It was fun. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for enjoying this fishbowl, too.
Wouldn't you like to quit your job and live the life you've always dreamed of? You're really living the dream, I would imagine, the expat dream.
I feel more free here than I do in the States.
This is it, man. This is the life. Join me, Savannah Jane Buffett, as I follow Jameson Whitbeck, a native of Vermont who dreamt of building wooden boats, and after college did just that. It wasn't long before he moved his wife and kids down to the Virgin Islands to become a charter captain of his very own handcrafted catamaran.
The first time we moved, we had, no money in the account.
1, 2, 3.
I think there's advantages and disadvantages wherever you are. It's just a trade-off, and you choose which ones you want to live with.
So this is what it's all about, right? You get to take your kids down to the beach.
Absolutely. Congratulations on making your life worth living.
Yes.